Hi Movement, welcome to our online celebration. We're so glad that you're here with us today. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but before we get started, just wanted to remind you that even though we're not together in person, we can still engage as a community. We love to see all of your comments coming through on Facebook, so let us know that you're with us this morning. If there's something you want to say in a comment in response to worship or something in the message, we love seeing those come through. We want you to be reminded that you're part of this community, and this community is still thriving even though we can't be together in person. So please drop a comment, let us know that you're with us this morning. And later on in our online celebration, we are going to have an interactive time together, and that will require that you have a writing utensil of some sort. So if you have a pen or a marker, something like that, or if you want to get more creative, you can certainly find something else. And then something to write on as well, like a note card or a piece of paper. So if you have a minute right now, you might want to go grab those things so that you'll have them prepared later on when we have that interactive time together. And I also just wanted to remind you all that there are a ton of resources on our website at movementfinley.com. You can find all of the updates as it relates to COVID-19, and also there are a lot of resources for families. So if you are someone who has kiddos and you're continuing to disciple them during this season, there's a lot of great tools online, so don't forget that those are there for you. And also, if you're looking for ways to serve, I know that that's something that a lot of you have had questions about, and you've been reaching out about that. There are a ton of opportunities, and that's probably the best place on our website to find those opportunities, and we'll be updating those as more things arise. So that's the best place to look for those updates. And as usual, if you miss an online message, you can always catch that on our website as well. And one thing that we also wanted to just take a moment to pause and celebrate is related to our Easter celebration last Sunday. So for those of you who are with us on Sunday, it was just a great time of celebration, but also a really big time of generosity. And for those of you who were joining us, you know that as a community, we chose to, for every person who engaged online on Sunday, we donated $5 toward a couple of different places that are fighting hunger during this pandemic. So locally, it's the City Mission, and then globally in Guatemala through Lifeline Christian Mission. So we just want you all to know that we had more people by far than we've seen before engage online last Sunday, which was really exciting. So thank you all for inviting people, for inviting friends and family. And because of that, we've been able to be even more generous. And we want you to know that we were able to donate $3,000 toward providing food resources for people in need, again, both locally and globally, which is a really big deal. And we just want you to know that you're part of that, and inviting people into that gives them a picture of what it looks like to be a community that's active in generosity. And we want you to know that that generosity doesn't stop here, that it continues, and we're going to continue as needs come up to provide and to be active in generosity. So thank you for being part of that.
So this song is really good. It's called Found in You, and it's a really nice song for this season because it doesn't matter where we are when we're worshiping. There's statements of invitation in this entire song, you know, that we're reaching out and we're welcoming God into our space, and then it's asking Him to fill this place that we're in, or to flood our thoughts. And take some time to pay attention to the lyrics as we go through, because it's a great practice to get into, to invite God into our hearts, into our thoughts, to saturate every space. So Absolutely. This is a great song for that. Reaching out to welcome you, God. Fill this place.
now to yours. Every fear bow down to your love. Then we will see like never before. Give us the greatness of a never-changing God. 'Cause all we want and all we need is found in you, found in you, Jesus. Every victory is found in you, found in you. And in your presence there is freedom. And in your presence we are made whole. And in your presence there is freedom. And in your presence we are made whole. 'Cause all we want and all we need is found in you, found in you, Jesus. Every victory is found in you, found in you. And all we want and all we need is found in you, found in you, Jesus. Every victory is found in you, found in you.
Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited about today as we're going to begin a 3-week series called I Doubt It. And we're going to have some conversation together on what to do with our doubts. You know, what do we do when things just don't seem to make sense? And I don't know about you, but for me, there are just a lot of things that don't make sense right now in this moment. And sure, there's the obvious stuff, right? Like everything that comes with a global pandemic. I mean, everyone is trying to make sense of that. Like, how long is this going to last? You know, when will it end? What's essential? How do I protect myself? But the season has also brought a lot more things to the plate than that just don't make sense. And so I came up with a list of things that just don't seem to make sense to me, and I'm going to share my list, but let's have some fun together this morning. And so as I'm saying my list of things that don't seem to make sense, here's what I want you to do. I want you to drop some comments in the comment section or the chat section and just answer what doesn't make sense to you. And so let me just start with an easy one. This doesn't make sense to me. Tiger King, all right? Now, this does not make sense to me, and you can go ahead and try to make sense of that, but it doesn't work. Okay, here's another one. TikTok. That does not make sense to me. I mean, anyone else have a teenager walking around the house like this all day, and I swear if I hear Dad, check out my new dance one more time, I'm just gonna lose it. Or how about this, the weather? I mean, sure, it's Ohio and it's spring, but 75 a week ago, then 3 days later, snowballs are like flying from the sky. Makes no sense. Here's a little more of a sophisticated one. Wrestling without an audience, all right? Seriously, have you tried to watch wrestling without an audience? It does not make sense. Good luck with that. A little closer to home. 7th grade math makes 0 sense to me. For that matter, 3rd grade math, not making a whole lot of sense. And so I don't know what it is for you, but I know we probably all have things that don't make sense. So drop some comments, love to hear. And a word of advice for those of you who are married. I know that you've had to spend a lot of time with your spouse, and I mean a lot of time, but I would still not say that your spouse doesn't make sense. You know, I wouldn't go there if I were you. Now, we all have things in our lives that don't make sense, but let's go one step deeper. Do you know who sometimes doesn't make a lot of sense? I believe that's God. And yes, we're in a season right now where for many of us, at some level, God just doesn't really seem to make sense. But I want you to know something really interesting. We didn't just plan this series after COVID-19 appeared and kind of came to be. We were planning on doing this series after Easter for months, really since the end of last year, because we just feel like it's something that so many of us face. Like, God doesn't always seem to make sense. And we look at how life works or doesn't work, and it just doesn't make sense. And so this is not just relevant now. I really feel like this is something that's kind of always been something we wrestled with. You know, maybe for you have some friends who are religious and they tell you all these stories. I prayed for a parking spot and then look what happened. Like one opened up right in front of me or something like that. And you're like, man, I'm praying for big things and God doesn't seem to be showing up, and you're getting parking spots. Or you prayed for God to do something. It was a real need. Maybe it was a job to put food on the table, or for a child to get better, or for a parent to get healthy. Maybe you're praying for your marriage to work out, or for cancer to be healed, and you hoped and you prayed, and God just seemed silent through all of that. And you found yourself saying, like, in that moment, where are you, God? And let's be honest, to this day, it just doesn't make sense. So let's just do a little mass confessional here for a moment. Has there ever been a time where God didn't make sense to you? And so let me know if you're tracking with me. If you're watching on Facebook, just give me a like or a thumbs up. You can do just the like button. Or if you're watching on our streaming platform through our website, just drop an emoji of a thumbs up, or really whatever emoji you want in the chat section. But let me just say this with complete confidence. You are not the only one who's had this experience, who thinks this about God, that they just doesn't always make sense. I mean, I would just say all of us are on a level playing field when it comes down to it. And here's why I believe these 3 weeks are so important. You see, most of us, when faced with seasons when God just doesn't seem to make sense, we don't know what to do with God. And if we don't know what to do, over time, what happens is we develop this idea in our mind that if God is silent, then he must be absent. And if God isn't answering my prayer or doing what I think he should be doing, then maybe he's just not even there. And there goes your faith, and there goes your hope, and it's just kind of all gone. And so here's what we're going to do over the next 3 weeks. We're going to look at 3 stories from the New Testament about people who God loved deeply. And all these individuals follow God with their lives, but they all had this experience where God didn't seem to make sense. And they felt like he was inattentive or uncooperative or perhaps late. And here's what I hope we get from these 3 weeks. We can go through times where, God feels distant, and seasons of life where God may seem inattentive, uncooperative, or late, but it doesn't have to wreck our faith, because God can show up in those times. I love this quote that I heard. It said, "Those who believe, they believe in God, but without passion in the heart, without anguish of mind, without uncertainty, without doubt, and even at times without despair, believe only in the idea of God and not in God himself." Well, if you have a Bible or a phone, you can go ahead and you can turn to Mark chapter 6. And here's where the first story begins. It begins with a guy named King Herod. He was the king of Israel, not because he was Jewish or anything like that, but because the Romans needed someone to run Israel. And let me just say this, Herod was a bad dude. He had a bunch of wives. He murdered 2 of them. He murdered one of his mother-in-laws, murdered babies, innocent people. I mean, he's a bad guy. And once he died, Rome decided to split up his kingdom because they felt like Herod had too much power. And so they split it between 2 of his sons, and this really becomes part of this story. One went to the south, and he didn't last a whole long, but Herod Antipas went to Galilee, where Jesus spent a good part of his time alive. And there was a 3rd son, Herod Philip, but he really didn't get anything, and so he's just kind of there. But there's another character in our story, a niece named Herodias, and she falls in love with Philip, and so she gets married to her uncle. And if you can make sense of that, like, good luck making sense of what happens next, because one day Herod Antipas decides to visit his brother Philip, and while he's there, he's alone with Herodias, and he says, "Look, I've fallen in love with you." And he pulls out his boombox and he plays "God Must Have Spent a Little More Time on You" by the Backstreet Boys, and like, she can't resist it. And so she says, "I love you too." Okay, and so that's kind of where we're at. Okay, let's have some fun together. What's the best cheesy love song you can think of? Go ahead and drop me a comment. Like, what is like that cheesy love song that you just can't do without? Anyways, so they run off together. She divorces Philip and marries his brother. Weird, and becomes Queen of Galilee, and this is like a big scandal. And so life is good for them until the entrance of our main character in our story today, a guy by the name of John the Baptist. And he has a famous cousin named Jesus, and God sent John to really preach a simple message, and that is to stop messing around, because God was about to do something really great, and you're not going to recognize it if there's sin in your life. And so I want you to remember this, like, John the Baptist was sent by God. And John was a hero amongst common people. I mean, he wasn't afraid of anyone. He said whatever was on his mind. He had this huge passion for God. And the problem was Herodias moved into the palace with Antipas, and by doing so, she really broke the Jewish law, and it was an offense to them. And so John, he doesn't miss this. He begins to preach out loud in the city about Herodias and Herod Antipas. And so she finds out, and she decides they need to get rid of him, and Herod agrees. So this is the setup. I mean, this is pretty good stuff, right? Like juicy soap opera type stuff. That's what's happening. And here's what we read in Mark 6. It said, "For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, 'It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife.' So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. And when Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him." Now, what's interesting is apparently when Herod Antipas got bored, he would like go get John, and they'd bring him up from prison. And when he brought him up, John would preach his message that the Messiah is coming and to stop doing wrong and to turn to God. And Herod, he would say, "Herod, you're living in adultery." And Herod would listen to all this. And he would say, like, there's something about this guy, Jesus' arrival, who said, Jesus is the one. John's the guy who baptized hundreds of people, really preparing them for Jesus. And John is the guy who even baptized Jesus. I mean, John is the guy who many of the religious leaders wondered, maybe he's even the Messiah. I mean, John is a very important guy in God's story. He's done everything God has asked him to do, and yet here's what we know, right? He finds himself in prison. And if there was ever a time for a miracle, this would have been a good time, and yet here John is, he's just like in prison, rotting away, and this doesn't make sense. So John had some friends that would visit him in prison, and they would give him information about what's going on. And so John knew that Jesus is out, performing miracles and teaching and doing all this stuff for strangers, and yet he's still in prison. And so one day his guys are visiting him, and he says this. He says, "I need you to send a message to Jesus." And here's the message. John says, "I want you to ask, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? And they're probably like, you really want me to send this, John? Like, this is what you want me to tell Jesus? John, you're the person who told us that he's the one. And, I think this is so great for us because this is where we live, right? Like, Jesus, nothing is going right, and I just need an answer. I just need something. And so often when our circumstances, change, and we find ourselves in a bad spot, it impacts our confidence in God. I mean, none of us are immune to this. I mean, even Jesus' cousin is not immune to this. As time grows where you're without a job, it begins to take its toll, and you're perhaps losing faith in God. You have a rebellious child that continues to make bad decisions, and you're scared to death, and your faith is wavering. You're married, and it was awesome, and now it's not. Circumstances are different, and your faith is impacted. And so often our circumstances change, and it really impacts the way that we think about God. We're like John, right? God, I need a little help. I need some assurance. I need some assurance that what I believe is true because it's not working for me. So let me ask you a question. Why? Why is it that we're prone to lose faith when God seems inactive or inattentive? And I think the big reason why is when we're in the middle of our pain, we sort of shrink down to the size of our pain. You see, when I am in isolation, all I can see is my loneliness. And when I am financially struggling, all I can see is my bank account dwindling. And when I'm hurt, all I see is my hurt. I mean, this is the nature of pain. It shrinks us to the size, really shrinks us to the size of that pain. And this is not just for us, this is for John the Baptist as well. I mean, John has seen all this stuff about Jesus. He knows all this stuff about Jesus. And yet, his world is no bigger than his prison cell, and he begins to doubt. Well, Jesus responds to John's question. I love how he does it. He doesn't say, well, of course I am. Stop doubting. Who do you think you are? He doesn't say, yeah, I'm the one, and I'm busting you out tonight. Here's the message Jesus sends back to John. And what he says to John is so practical for all of us when God seems inactive or inattentive in our life. Jesus replies this to John. He says, go back and report to John what you see and what you hear. Go back and tell John what you hear and what you see because John can't see past his prison cell. I mean, that's all he sees. And then Jesus says this, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Go back and tell them, God is moving. And then Jesus gives them one more thing to say, and check this out. He says this, blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. What? So Jesus, you might actually, think about this. Basically, Jesus is saying, look, I might actually do things that would allow you to have doubts, to have questions. He says, yeah, I want you to go back and tell John that. But wait, Jesus, you're gonna leave him in prison? You're not gonna break him out? Yeah. Tell him not to lose faith just because I've chosen not to bail him out, right? This is tough stuff. Jesus could have bailed him out, but for whatever reason, he chooses not to bail him out, and it doesn't make sense. But check this out. Look what Jesus ends with, and I love his words. He says this, truly I tell you, among those born of women, which is pretty much everyone, there has never risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. So let me just tell you why this is good news for us. I think there are two things. First one is this. Our personal circumstances, like where we find ourselves, do not reflect, our circumstances do not reflect how God feels about us. See, when we're in a season of pain and difficulty and things seem to be getting worse, we start to come to this conclusion that my circumstances must reflect like the way God feels about me. And God says, no. They don't. Don't ever draw that conclusion. Don't make the mistake of letting your faith hinge on what God has or hasn't done for you. The second one is this. There are doubts and questions do not offend God. Jesus was not offended by John's question. He was not offended. I mean, he didn't write John off. In fact, Jesus says there has never been anyone greater than John. In other words, you can come to God with your questions. So what do you do when God just seems to be inattentive or unavailable? What do you do when doubt starts to creep in because God seems distant or doesn't make sense? I think if you were to ask Jesus, if we were to do that, he would give us just like the same advice he gave John in prison. I think there's two big things. First one is this: look back and remember when God did come through for you. Like, we've all had times where God came through when we weren't sure how it was going to work, and God provided for us in some way. He brought people into our lives. He helped us through a difficult situation. He provided by answering a specific prayer. And be encouraged that God was real then and he's real now. Like, he's just not expressing his reality in the same way that you want him to right now. And I just want to encourage you to remember. The second thing is this: look outside of your circumstances at how God is moving. This is why it's so important to stay connected with people who are following Jesus. You see, our reaction is to pull back, to isolate ourselves, but we need to be around people where God is moving, because it helps us to see outside of our circumstances right now. And we have to look outside of our world, because God is actively working all around us. And when we do that, you're going to see that God is still there. He's still at work. And so let me just close. Let me take you back to these words from Jesus. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. Let me encourage you. We are the anyone, right? Blessed means to be blessed by God, to find favor, means that God does know your name. He is paying attention to you. And here's what we need to remember: when God is silent, he's not absent. It just means that we have to be willing to look outside of our prison walls and outside of our prison cell and understand that God is at work, and there's a promise in the end that we'll be blessed. It doesn't mean the situation is going to change. It may not turn out the way that we want it to. John's didn't. John ended up losing his life. It may not make sense, but this doesn't change who God is. And someday, God will make sense of all of this for us.
So we sing this song at Movement a lot. We're going to sing a song together called The Lost Are Found. And we sing this song all the time at Movement. And I really feel like this song has so much in it that is a part of our DNA, but not only our DNA, but just the DNA of God. And God is about people. And in this song, we see where, John has this encounter with Jesus' disciples, and he says, is this really Jesus? Is this really the one that's to come? Because he's in these horrible circumstances where he's in prison. And regardless of our circumstances or John's circumstances, like Jesus says to his disciples to tell him, the lost are found, the blind will see, the lame will walk, the dead will live. And that's the heartbeat of this song. And I just love that we're a church that strives to win the lost, and to love those that haven't felt the love of God yet. So, is there anything you want to add to that, Steph?
No, I just completely agree. I think it's important to remember in this time that none of us are forgotten, that God sees our circumstances and what we're going through, and that each one of us is important. It lists different kinds of people, the lost and the blind and the dead, and it doesn't matter what your circumstances, you're all individually important. And so I love this song for those exact reasons, that in this season, don't forget, God sees you specifically for your exact circumstance, and you can be found, you can be saved.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's sing this song together.
Deal.
everlasting, while earthly ages fade. In mercy, our God, your kingdom reigns. Lord over everything, you are near, you are all of the universe at your feet. In the Savior, injustice brought right. For your glory, let your name be lifted high. Lord over everything, you are near, you are all of the universe at your feet. Lord over everything, you are near, you are all of the universe at your feet. The lost are found, the blind will see, the lame will walk, the dead will live, and you are God forever, you will reign. The lost are found, the blind will see, the lame will walk, the dead will live, and you are God forever, you will reign. The lost are found, the blind will see, the lame will walk, the dead will live, and you are God forever, you will Amen.
All right, well, we talked earlier about just this idea that we can go to God with our questions, like that God is not offended by our questions. And Ellen, I just want to have a little conversation about just walking through doubts and how you do that, but also then we're going to have some time to have a prayer experience. I think one of the really significant things about this season when we're not together physically is how do we participate? Like, how do we be a part of this together? And I thought, how cool would it be if we actually wrote out some prayers and did this together? So I talked earlier about grabbing a note. Actually, I didn't talk earlier. Ellen, you talked earlier about grabbing a note card and a pen or a pencil or marker or whatever it is that you want to write with. If you have that, great. If not, you can go ahead and grab that. You're going to need it here in a couple minutes. But Ellen, just talk about kind of how you deal with questions and kind of what are some things that you do to remember God's faithfulness?
Yeah, I think for me, one thing that I like is in prayer and just uncertainties. It just helps me to process things, helps me to process through emotion and what I'm really looking for.
Right.
And honestly, it's become this really beautiful way to look back then too, and to be able to see those seasons where I had some questions and then God walked me through that, and to see his faithfulness on the other end of it. And just to be able to look back at that as a reminder, and it fills me with that hope for the future too.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of you look back and go, man, God was faithful here. He was faithful here, and I know He'll be faithful again.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, let's go ahead and pull out your card. Here's what I want to do. I want to have a prayer experience together, and rather than us just pray over a computer and you're just in your place. Kind of hearing that prayer, I want you to participate. And so we can go to God with our questions. And here's what I want you to do. I just want you to write out on your card, like maybe an area of your life where you have a question about, a faith question, or where you just like, God, I need to bring my doubt to you, whatever that may be. And then what we're going to do is just pray over these the next 3 weeks. And so, what you would write on your card is just that if you're like, God, would you show up in this way? Or God, this doesn't make sense. Would you help me to understand why? If you just want to take a minute and write that out, we'll do the same. And then I'll pray. And I'm just going to give a space where you can pray over these. And then my prayer is on daily that you just pray over what you write on your card. As we get ready to pray, I wrote on my card, it's nothing like overly elaborate, just said, God, help me understand your timing. Like, I think about God not making sense, and you may not realize we're actually sitting inside the Ace hardware building right now. It is just kind of this big space, and we've got all this stuff that was happening and moving, and now it's just like kind of come to a halt. And so just praying, God, help me to understand your timing. God, make sense of that. And so I don't know what you wrote, but let's pray. I'm going to lead us in prayer, and then I'm just going to give some space for you to, in your place, in your living room, in your kitchen, that you can pray over this. So God, we come to you with our questions. We come to you with our areas of our lives that don't seem to make sense, perhaps even doubt, God, about how you're going to come through or what that's going to look like. And God, my prayer is that today would be a day that we would know that we're together. We're not alone. There are literally hundreds of us together praying over these prayers. And at the same time, God, we all have our own personal prayer, the thing that we need to bring to you. So God, just right now in this place, these cards that we wrote on, God, we pray over these. We're just going to take a minute to lift these up to you. And God, help us to see the bigger picture. Help us to understand that you're faithful, that you keep your promises, that you will bless us as we lean into and place our trust in you. And God, I just pray that you would really help us to understand, and to see you clearly in the midst of difficult circumstances. And we pray this all, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as we talk about just areas where we look around and see that God's working, last weekend we were able to raise some money or give some money to City Mission, and then also to Lifeline, and which was super cool. I know you've been to Guatemala, Ellen, and so just super cool. And I just, want to encourage you as we continue to move forward to be faithful in generosity. It's just, I think as we talk about trust, and so much of this doubt stuff is, do I trust God? Will I trust God? And so much of that comes through our generosity. And so
I think that it's really important just to continue to, like you were saying, look outside of ourselves.
Absolutely.
It helps to practice generosity and looking to somebody else's need in this time. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you can give online towards the mission of Movement to help people find and follow God. It's just at movementfindlay.com/give. And just thanks for going on this journey and having this conversation with us. All right. Well, hey, Movement, we talk a lot around here about being the church, about going and being the church. And I've had people ask, how can I serve during this time? And how can I not just serve, but how can I continue to take steps spiritually? And let me just encourage you to do something that I believe is one of the most important things you can do right now to serve other people, but also I really believe that God is going to grow you as you do it. And that is to reach out to people on the daily and just be an encouragement to them. See how they're doing and how you can pray for them. It doesn't have to be a long phone call. It can be quick, but just taking 10, 15, 20 minutes a day to reaching out to people, both that are part of the movement community, but more importantly, those people that you're invested in that perhaps are even far from God. You can be a voice in their lives, and you can be a person of prayer for them. And so here's all you got to do. Just if you have an Apple device, FaceTime, because that's the way to go. But otherwise, even if it's a phone call, but just make a call. I'm going to hop on here real quick and just ask a couple questions.
What is up, dude?
Joe, what's up, man? How are you?
Good, pretty good. I'm doing pretty well.
Good, dude. How's work going?
Busy. We've been pretty busy, but it's going well.
Still working. You're still working then.
Still working, yep.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I was just thinking about you, and I just wanted to reach out and see what I can be praying for you about, man. Is there anything specifically I can be praying for you about?
Yeah, my stepdad, he went to the ER room last night. He had chest pains. So
Really?
Yeah, pray over that situation.
All right, man. Are like just like stuff with COVID, or just more like other things going on?
No, he had heart surgery like 2 months
Okay.
ago, so I think it has something to do with that. He's just kind of recovering still from that, so.
Certainly, man. Certainly. We'll be
Yeah.
doing that. But, dude, I just want you to know that I was thinking about you and praying for you. And,
Appreciate it.
man, if you need anything at all, if I can help you in any way, let me know. We're here for you and here to serve, dude.
All right, sounds good, man.
All right, talk to you
Coffee
soon.
would be great.
I would love an Americano. Actually, I just tried to get, go buy Americano, and, every place is closed. So
Yeah.
this too shall pass. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.
All right, see ya.
All right, so simple phone call. Hey, you may even choose to pray for that person over the phone, depending on what your relationship is. But just letting people know that you're praying for them, that you're here for them, and that you're ready to serve. So, movement, go and be the church. Let this season be a time where you really just engage in the mission that God's called you to.